Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Thank you for joining us for our global outlook with a local view. Americans give somewhere around $260 billion to charity, or what we call nonprofits, each year. For your information, Utah has the highest average charitable deduction per household, and West Virginia the lowest. Households that give to religious organizations donate about twice as much as households that give to secular organizations, which brings us to our guest and our topic today. Todd Polikoff is the new CEO of the Jewish Community Board of Akron. Today we're going to find out more about Todd and why we should care, who is in this position. Todd also chose to come back to Northeast Ohio after a few years in Las Vegas. He should have an interesting perspective on the West Coast versus the North Coast and why we are the best location in the nation. Welcome to Forum 360.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start out by asking you specifically about your role. Jews are about 2% of the population of the United States. So why is a Jewish community center an important part of a community, or is it?
I think it is. I know it is. And if you look at the way that our community has always existed in this country, we came over as refugees, the majority of us, or we came here because we knew there was a better life here. And one of the things Jews had to do, certainly in the early 1900s, there's a sense of circling the wagons, that oftentimes the only places Jews were welcome were in Jewish institutions. And if you look at the growth of the JCC movement, it was because Jews had nowhere else to go. Jews weren't allowed in certain country clubs. They weren't allowed in certain health clubs. They weren't allowed in bathhouses. And the JCCs really started that movement. And that was on the heels of the Federation movement, which was really a campaign for Jewish needs. Whether it was Jews who were still coming over that needed to be resettled in this country, or it was, look, our kids want a summer camp to go to. We want to make sure our kids have Jewish education. We want to make sure our elderly are taken care of. There was a sense, and I think today it's still the case in some ways, that if Jews don't take care of Jews, no one else is going to take care of Jews. And what you're seeing today, I think, is the evolution of that circling of the wagons in that first generation, or the first generations of the 1900s that came to this country. My grandfather came in the late 1800s by himself.
Long time.
And landed in Seattle, actually made his way across the country to his family in Philadelphia. But if it weren't for those institutions, he wouldn't have been able to get here.
So the role they play today for a camp or a school or taking care of the elderly, is there still a need for Jews to take care of Jews?
I think there's always going to be a need for Jews to take care of Jews. We live in a world, certainly for Jews, I don't think we'll ever take for granted a question of we're completely comfortable. Are we completely comfortable where we are? I think you'll always find a segment of the Jewish community that will say, we need to make sure that there's something here by and for the Jewish community. The past couple years in this country have certainly shown us that we can't always be so easy. We can't always sit back and say everything's great. But I think the role has evolved. And there's a point for Jews where we have to say we're a light unto nations. And we have to express who we are as a people outward into the community. So in the general community, if there's a resource that we have as a Jewish community, if there's a role that we can play, we should be a resource to the general community as well, not just the Jewish community. And I think that's a responsibility that we have. So I think the role has evolved as we become more successful in these campuses. I mean, we're not talking about a couple of rooms now. We're talking, here in Akron, we have 55 acres. I mean, we have a campus. When you look around the country at JCCs, you know, I think JCCs on a given day, 1.5 million people will walk through the doors of a JCC.
And that 1.5 million, just for our viewers and our listeners, that 1.5 million, out of that, what percentage is Jewish, what percent is not Jewish that are going to a Jewish community center on a daily basis?
Depending on the community you're talking about, it could be between 50 to 75, 80%.
Are
not Jewish.
are not Jewish, benefiting and enjoying a
Absolutely.
Jewish community center.
Absolutely, but again, for us, it's the campus. It's not just the center. It's what we can provide.
So let me ask you, you've kind of laid a context for a campus and the value of a campus, but how does the person who is in your position affect a community?
So the role that I believe I play and the role that my segment of the campus plays, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, our job is to be the strategic arm of the community. We have people...
And let me back up
Sure.
there. So the strategic arm of the community means what to you?
So what it means to me is we have to know where we're going in 3 to 5 years. And I think it's a constant conversation of what's next for this community. What's next for us when we look at the general Akron community and we see that there are growth strategies or attraction strategies for Akron. We want to be a part of that. When we see that there are elderly in this community who need services, we want to be a part of that. That's not necessarily the role of the JCC or the Lippman School, which are also on the campus, but we need, as the JCBA, to look out 80,000 feet across the horizon and say, where are the opportunities for the Jewish community to grow? Where are the opportunities for the Jewish community to service the Jewish community? And then where are the opportunities for the Jewish community to be a resource to everyone else? And that's where I see the role of JCBA, and certainly my role. We are not the day-to-day operational piece of the campus. We have people, we have a great director of the school and the J, but our job is to be the strategic arm.
So let me ask you, when you first came to interview for this position, and
Sure.
you've been in this position less than a month?
5 weeks.
5 weeks, okay.
I snuck up on you.
Over a month. Okay, you've been in 5 weeks.
Yeah.
When you came to that 55 acres,
Yeah.
okay, when you came to Akron, what did you see?
A lot of potential. I saw a lot of, when I first came here to visit during the interview process.
That's what I mean, when you first came.
I lived in Cleveland for 5 years. I think I was down in Akron once for a meeting at that facility. I had no idea what was on that campus. I didn't know that there was a fully functional Jewish day school. I didn't know that there's a 100 apartment HUD building, or that there's this entire campus behind it. Mm-hmm. And I think when I saw that and I realized what was there, and Summa Health is there, and I mean, this is a jewel. And we, in looking at it, the potential lies in, we don't discuss the campus as a campus. Mm-hmm. Just now, we've been talking about the JCC. Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about the school that's on the campus. We have an incredible school on the campus. We didn't talk about the immense outdoor pool out back, or the day camp, or the HUD apartments, or the Summa Health piece that's there, or the fitness facility that's there, or Jewish Family Services there. That's all on this one campus. And I don't think enough of the community, both in Akron and outside of Akron, throughout Summit County, understand what we have on that campus and what's open for them to use. So that's the opportunity that lies for us.
Let's go back. You're a CEO of a nonprofit.
Correct.
Okay, so let's look at your background. When you were 5 or 10 or 15, and someone...
Do you have that information?
And when someone said to you, what do you want to be?
Yeah.
Little Todd, what do you want to be when you grow up? I just don't picture too many people saying, gee, I want to be in a nonprofit. I want to run a nonprofit. So, tell us a little bit about what you thought you wanted to do when you were 5 or 10 or 15 and how you got to this role.
I would love to say that I was self-aware enough at 5 or 10 to know what I wanted to be. I know I'm fairly certain I wanted to be a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to
What we don't know is if they wanted you to be a member.
Well, it doesn't matter if they wanted me. I knew I was good enough at 5 or 10. But literally, this came down to I am doing everything I'm doing in my career over 25 years because of an organization called BBYO, B'nai B'rith Youth Organization.
Okay, and for those that don't know what that is,
it's the largest Jewish youth group in the world. It's non-denominational. It's throughout the world. And there was a chapter in near Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where I went to high school. And, I didn't really have that much affiliation in the Jewish community. Very blue-collar family. My parents weren't president of the synagogue and all of that. And BBYO was an entry point for me into the community. And I took to it like a moth to a flame and loved it. My best friends today are friends I made in high school through that. So one day in school, as it happens, the guidance counselor gets everybody together and they say, well, what do you want to do? And I was really perplexed. And I said, I have no idea what I want to do. And she said, where do you spend most of your time? And I said, at the JCC. And she said, you know, people work there. And I was floored. And I still remember to this day, Miss Bradley.
Good for Miss Bradley. See, a guidance counselor can make a difference.
Yeah, and it totally turned me around, and I went and talked to a couple people who I knew were working in the Jewish community at the time, my regional director for BBYO, and it got me on this path.
So when you went to college, you majored in what?
Psychology.
And then your path after college?
So I moved to Israel right after high school. I decided, I had met Israelis and all this. I'd never been to Israel. And I found a way to get myself to Israel. I didn't tell my parents before I bought my ticket, which was a whole other show.
Love to see how that works when your kids do that to you.
Yeah, I think my mother is still angry with me. But I moved to Israel right after high school and then came back and went to a small school in New Jersey, 5,000 students, Stockton University. And I got involved in the Jewish community on campus. And that evolved into more opportunities, getting involved with the National Federation movement, and then moved back to Israel after college for a fellowship called Project Otzma. And when I came back, I actually interviewed for a job in Chicago in Israel. Got the job, I was home for 2 weeks, and then was off starting my career in Jewish communal service, nonprofit.
Now, your work in the last few years took you to Las Vegas.
Correct.
And now back to Northeast Ohio. So with a perspective from out west, what would you like people here to know about this area that people that live here may not think about or realize?
First of all, I would say, if you're talking Akron specifically.
Either one, Northeast Ohio or
Northeast
Akron?
Ohio, I don't think there are too many people who would argue with me that there is an embarrassment of riches when it comes to Jewish leadership and nonprofit leadership and nonprofit vision in Northeast Ohio. I mean, if you just look in the Jewish community, whether it's the families who are involved up in Cleveland or the families who are involved here in Akron that have made many of these institutions and buildings and whatnot possible, they've done that not just to make a gift and name something and slap their name on the wall. They've done it to make sure that future generations understand what it means to give and what it means to be involved in community. They give what we call leadership gifts. And I don't think the normal person who walks into a building would see that. As a professional, when you look at donor intent and you study the intent of the donors throughout Northeast Ohio who have done what they've done, it's remarkable that so many of them live in this relatively small part of the country. It's really an embarrassment of riches in leadership. And then you take the things that they've been able to establish, the campuses and the different programs and things like that. There are not too many opportunities for a Jewish family in Northeast Ohio that they can't have access to because of a number of these philanthropists who've come through the doors of these different organizations. I don't think people notice that.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you about the non-Jewish perspective.
Sure.
But today we are talking to Todd Polikoff, who is the new CEO of the Jewish Community Board of Akron, and we're finding out who he is and why all of Northeast Ohio should care about why he is in place. So from a non-Jewish perspective, what do people living here not realize or think about Northeast Ohio as someone that comes back here that's been living somewhere else?
Well, you can go with some
Besides the Browns.
No, the Browns, again, as an Eagles fan, I'm immune to the Browns issues. We have our own as Eagles fans. But I think there's an aggregate, right? When you look at Northeast Ohio and you look what's here. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the second largest theater district in the country is in Cleveland, okay? One of the largest national park systems is in Northeast Ohio. You have professional sports teams in the area. You have a university right down the street here. You have phenomenal public schools. You have phenomenal private schools. And then if you really want to talk, coming from out west where it's 120 sometimes in the summer, The weather here, yes, it goes up and down, but you don't have, knock on wood, you know.
I say, we don't have knock on wood, we don't have monsoons,
Yeah,
we don't have tornadoes,
you
we
know,
don't have
there's
mudslides,
there's something
we don't
to
have fires.
that.
Yes.
And it's a relatively accessible part of the country. And if you want to be outdoors, you can be outdoors. If you want to go, you know, hiking, you can go hiking. You want to golf, you want to do whatever. It's a very nice part of the country. It's a great place to raise kids. And for the non-Jewish community, I would hope that all members of the community recognize that. And oftentimes it takes an outsider's perspective to tell people, hey, by the way.
That's why I want you to tell us. As a fan of Northeast Ohio,
yeah,
I want you to tell us.
Every time I drive up to Cleveland, I drive through a national park. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Thank you, John Cyberling. While millennials and Generation X care deeply about issues in the world, they seem to sometimes be less likely to engage, to formally become members of organizations. So what is your plan to engage younger people?
So some of my colleagues know this is one of my hot button issues. Because the way that you defined engaged, that's from the jump off, that's one of the issues that we have. Engagement used to mean, are you paying dues to something? Did you join something? Did you get a bill? Did you pay the bill? Did you make a pledge? Mm-hmm. That's an old definition of engaged. Engaged today could be someone who goes online, takes a course in Jewish theory and thought. Are they as engaged as someone?
Okay, so let me be the dinosaur in the room that says, okay, Todd, but how are we going to pay our bills if everyone wants to be engaged and nobody wants to pay?
I didn't say they weren't paying.
I understand that, but you understand, if you take that
Yes.
out, don't you hear that? I'm not saying it's true
you
or
do.
right, but do you hear that? And I'm
Of course
sure
you do.
you answer that.
Of course
so
you
I
do.
want to give you a chance to answer
So
that.
there's two things here. Well, there's more than two, but let's talk about the pay versus not pay. There's financial capital and there's human capital. The financial capital only comes after someone invests their human capital. And if we go out and the first thing we put forward is you have to pay, we're never going to get their human capital. And I think we are missing great amounts of intellectual human capital in the nonprofit world because there's a thought, well, I have to pay something to do that. Let's engage people, okay? On a level where they want to be engaged. And yes, we can all be adults at some point and say, look, it's great that you love it, but it does cost money. But once they engage with it and they love it and they understand it, it becomes a value proposition. And we have to take the perspective, especially with, you mentioned millennials, we have to take the perspective of we have to engage people first. And we have a lot of issues that we have to tackle in the community. And there are a lot of people out there who are much smarter than me in certain subjects. Marketing, we've talked about this briefly. Let's get some smart people around the table. I don't care if they give or not. And let's ask them their opinion.
On another topic, let's talk about security. Unfortunately, in this world, schools, synagogues, malls, hospitals have to worry about security. What are some of the security steps your campus has to go through?
Look, this is one of the things, if you talk about things that keep you up at night, in my role, and it shouldn't, and a lot of people, you know, whether it's a school or anywhere else, I think, you know, we have a very good relationship with the local police department, with the FBI, and there's an understanding that they have of us, of what our needs are, but I think there's more that we can do, certainly when it comes to funding from the state for security apparatus. You know, I don't know, there's always an argument that we put a fence around it. If you put a fence around it, what does it look like when you put a fence around it, right? But there are other ways for us to look at security on the campus. We have a very secure campus. We always have off-duty uniformed police officers on the campus, at the school. We have patrols that go around the school, around the whole campus. But there's always more you can do. But at some point, there's also this human intelligence piece that we have to know who's coming through the building. We have to know what's happening at the building. We can always get better. And that's something we're certainly going to be focusing on in 2019 because we want people to come to the campus. And we want them to feel like it's a secure place for them and their families. And it has been and it will continue to be, but we're always going to stay vigilant to make sure it stays that way.
Experts give us information on nonprofits, and I want to share some of it with you and ask you if you have found the same thing to be true, okay? 12% of all giving happens in the last 3 days of the year. Do you find that to be true?
It depends how your campaign is set up sometimes.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay,
Yes.
some organizations run January to December. Our campaign doesn't end until the spring. And there's always this moment in nonprofits where you don't know what the IRA guidelines are going to be for distributions. But certainly, there's a big push for nonprofits for the end of the year. So I would believe that. I don't know if it's necessarily the case in Akron yet. I still have to analyze all of our data.
12% of all, 64% of all donations are made by women. Do you find that to be true?
I don't know what the breakdown is here. I will tell you, if you look at, first of all, women outlive men, right? And the transfer of wealth that's going to be happening over the next several years is in the trillions of dollars. Wow. And organizations, including JCBA, have to focus on educating women on philanthropy, because oftentimes in these families, generationally, the women have not been involved in some of the finances or certainly some of the philanthropic process. And organizations that have been sort of antiquated have only dealt with the male in the family. And we have to pay much more attention to women. So I absolutely believe that number is probably accurate, if not growing.
Now, statistics say that Gen X donates more frequently than other generations.
Yeah.
Do you find that to be true?
Yeah.
65% of all social...
As a Gen Xer.
That's right. 65% of all social media activity occurs on a smartphone.
I would believe that number is low. I mean, yeah.
Text donors are more likely to be 49 to 59, female, married, and a college graduate.
Yes. I actually read somewhere that the fastest growing group on Facebook are moms over 50.
Yeah. Grandkids.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm going to ask you in the remaining minutes that we have left, I'm going to ask you for 1, 2, 3 word answers, okay?
Sure, I'll try.
Have you been here long enough to have a favorite between Swenson's and Skyway?
No.
Okay. Have you been to either Swenson's or Skyway?
No.
No.
It's a good follow-up question.
Wow.
No.
So you have that to look forward to.
One of many things.
Something that would surprise us that you've discovered or identified about Northeast Ohio?
Gosh. I am surprised how many people live in Akron who are actually born and raised in Akron.
That would be me.
I am really surprised by that.
Favorite Northeast Ohio sports team, is there one? Or I guess I should just say...
I will tell you, I have not been to a Rubber Ducks game yet, but I love going to the Captains.
Oh, okay.
I love minor league baseball stadiums. I think it's one of the few places left where you can...
Kent Babby will like that.
Yeah, it's one of the few places you can go where there's still, you can go with your family and it's great.
Favorite Jewish holiday?
I will, that's a tough one. It's a toss-up between Sukkot and Hanukkah.
Okay. Best part about being a dad?
Seeing the world through my kids' eyes.
Favorite Jewish food? And you can include Israeli food.
I can?
Yes.
There's too many. I will say, since she might watch this, my mother's pineapple kugel.
Oh, okay. And your least favorite Jewish food?
Easily, borscht. Hands down.
And I'm going to ask you in like 30 seconds
Yes.
to answer a complicated question. But for viewers or listeners, is there a difference between being Jewish, supporting Israel, being American? Like people often think if you're Jewish, then you're Israel. If you're Israel, you're Jewish. If you don't like Jews, you don't like Israel. If you don't like Israel, you don't like Jews. Can you weigh in on that in a few seconds?
A few seconds. Here's what I will say. As I tell my kids sometimes, when good or bad things happen, I say there are good and bad people in the world. Some of them happen to be Jewish. We have a propensity to try to define Jews. And there's pro-Israel Jews, and there's Reform Jews, and there's Orthodox Jews, and there's agnostic Jews. We know there are a lot of people out there who don't like Jews. Those people have one definition of Jew. Yet we as a Jewish community at times will find 70 different ways to divide ourselves. Your politics are your politics. My politics are my politics. What I believe as far as Israel is concerned, Jews have had a lot of influence over the years. Through generations, we've had influence. Without Israel, we have no power.
I like that as an ending. Without Israel, we have no power. There are more than 1.8 million recognized charitable organizations in the United States. Today, we learned a little more about one of them, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, and we learned about their new CEO and his road to the position. The World Giving Index attempts to provide insight into the scope of giving around the world. In the most recent edition, the United States was the second most giving nation out of 140 countries in the world. Our guest today helped us look at the giving world. How does a person choose the charity of their choice? They have to learn. How can nonprofits engage young leaders? We talked about, and some perhaps hidden benefits of Northeast Ohio compared to other parts of the country. Thank you to our guest and all of you for joining us on Forum 360. I'm Leslie Ungar with your global outlook with the local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.